Welcome. So thank you all for joining us. This is part of our monthly My Rounding webinar series. Just a few housekeeping items up front. All attendee lines are on mute. If you have any questions, which we've already had a couple, which is amazing, please go ahead and put those into the questions box on the right-hand side. Also, slides are available on the right-hand side under handouts, as well as a couple other resources, which I'll mention momentarily. And a recording of this webinar will also be available after the presentation. You will get a link in your email tomorrow. So we'll make sure to follow up with that. So here's our agenda for today. If you're looking at this, a lot of this is going to look really similar to some of the content that's in our How to Implement Rounding guide. This is something that we released a few weeks ago, and if you haven't already looked through this, it's a great reference to have on hand. And it's also available in that handouts panel on the right-hand side, along with some sample templates to get you started with your rounding. And we're just really going to use this as a foundation and then build upon it and give some examples and stories. So jumping into who is on the line with you, my name is Katie Anthony. I'm the marketing coordinator here at My Rounding, as well as your host for today. I'm joined by Steve Bachtel, Cassie Von Minden, and Kristen Salvatore, who are all amazing rounding experts. So thank you all so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Katie. And hi, everybody. My name is Steve Bachtel. I'm the CCO here at My Rounding. I have been in the patient and employee engagement consulting business for a little over 15 years now. I am fascinated by organizational behavior and really what makes organizations tick. Cassie?
Yeah, my name is Cassie Von Minden, and I am a part of the customer experience team. And I really enjoy working with health systems across the country to help drive market share by improving the patient experience through effective rounding. Kristen.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kristen Salvatore. I've been working with My Rounding for 2 years. I personally love the opportunity to get on site with my hospital systems across the country and drive change with leaders through coaching and providing tools to spark competition, which we will talk about a little bit later.
Great. So now that you know who we are, we just wanted to get a sense of who you are on our call with us. So I just launched a poll. So you should be able to answer who you are or what title you most closely align to. If you wouldn't mind filling that out real quick, that would be great. We see a lot of results coming in already. It looks like we have a lot of department managers on. And really we have people across the board. So we have some executive leaders, we have department managers, project leaders, care team members, and then also some non-staff and consultants. But it looks like people are still voting, so I'm going to give you a few more seconds to get your experience in here.
Pretty equal representation from all those categories. That's great.
Yeah, that is great. All right, it looks like most people have voted. So you should see up on your screen the results. So it is pretty evenly spread throughout all 5 of these options, but we do have a few more department managers on them than any other. Then we have another poll question back to back there. And that is going to be, why are you joining us on this webinar today? So we just want to get a sense of where you are within your rounding process so that we can kind of customize this a little bit to who we have on the line and where you are within this journey. So are you completely new to rounding? Have you already started implementing but are really just kicking this off? Have you already been rounding but are having difficulty gaining adoption? Or are you already rounding but just need to implement in a different department?
Can we take bets on who wins this one?
Sure can.
For me, it's probably between just starting to implement or gaining adoption. I'm betting. I bet it's the gaining adoption.
I'm going to second that. I wouldn't bet against you. So it looks like already we have a few more people that are voting, but over 50% are having difficulty with adoption.
Oh!
And the close second, actually, the completely new to rounding and just starting to implement are tied for a second.
Okay, so I think just the fact that gaining adoption edges a few others out. You're not alone. That's what we hear a lot. So.
Yeah, so you'll see up there the results. 54% are having trouble gaining adoption. 21% each completely new and just starting to implement rounding. So this is great to have all of you on here. This is going to be really great information for you as we go through all this.
You know, Katie, so the gaining adoption component really speaks, I think, to our first slide, and that is this isn't so much an initiative as it is a cultural shift. So a lot about what we're going to talk about today has far more to do with change management and culture management than it does just initiative design. So a lot of times we try to implement some technology or we try to implement this new initiative when really what we need to do is we need to get some people in a boat. So we kind of think about this as, you know, rounding is really number 3 in kind of a 4-step process. And the first 2 steps are cultural and psychological. The way I picture it is we're kind of about to go out on a lake and it's a cloudy day. The wind is blowing. We have some white-capped waves and we have to try to convince maybe 10 other people to get in the boat because we're pretty sure everything's a lot better on the other side. That is change management. And so really, Cassie, you're going to tell us the first step of coaxing folks into the boat. Hopefully we get a few folks that can row.
Yeah, I hope so too, Steve. So the first step in the change management process, and what I think is probably one of the most important, is to establish the why. So how can we gain the buy-in from the staff is to really get to the bottom and figure out their personal why. So we're really talking about the psychology of change here and not focusing on the mechanics of rounding. So to tap into people's psychology, we need to understand their why. And not everyone's going to have the same why, Steve.
Yeah, and I think if you've got, well, let's say we go back to those 10 people that are standing on the dock, we have to take each one of them as individuals. Truly, if you spend 30 minutes with a piece of paper thinking about who you'd like on this team from an implementation standpoint, think about what's driving each one of those people. I personally worked with a CEO who used to go out and used to tag each end of the hospital each day, 3 times a day, once when he arrived, once at lunchtime, once before he went home, because he was a culture guy. So, you know, we would probably think of some of the different ways we might use data to help him accentuate culture. But that was his why. We need to think about some of the other whys as well. Kristen, you're going to tell us what happens if we don't have a why.
So unfortunately, this is probably a little bit more common, is when you start out without a why or not being on the same page with all of your individuals, you can have the best intentions, but it can lead to a lot of confusion. I had a hospital system in California that started out with great intentions. They had all this information, they had all these templates and questions and lots of rounders trained up, but they didn't provide any direction for the staff. It led to confusion. No one understood what they were being held accountable for. They ended up revamping the entire process, tied all of their rounding questions to their HCAP goals for individual units, and then relaunched to the team with a better explanation of why this was important and what they wanted to learn from it. The culture change there was truly amazing because the relaunch spoke to all the individuals as to why they were being asked to do this.
So I mentioned taking 30 minutes and writing down everybody's why. That could have been 30 minutes really well spent for that organization. Maybe would have saved them several months before having to do a relaunch, it sounds like.
Yep.
Great. So now that we've talked about the why, we want to find out what your why is. As soon as I find my mouse. There we go. So your poll is launched. So really, what is your why to this process? Are you really looking to drive those HCAP scores or process improvements? Are you looking to improve patient safety or reducing those medical errors, which relates to that healthcare-associated infections that we're going to talk about next month?
And we got a little silly here towards the end with someone told me to. My CEO read an article on it. I actually have heard that, and I've heard it twice from 2 different hospitals. But I still think still a good reason.
Yeah, there are reasons that we've all heard, and it looks like somebody is taking advantage of that. CEO read an article on it, but really, it looks like while people are still voting, our biggest drivers right now are the HCAP or process improvements, as well as those improving patient safety options. All right, so it looks like most people have voted. So there's that chart there.
Interesting. So
9%.
HCAP score so HCAP score and improving patient safety, reducing medical errors. So two good opportunities to leverage data and numbers and probably post those numbers on a weekly basis. Not just HCAPs, but how are we rounding and is rounding. So one of the things we do here at My Rounding is correlate HCAP scores with rounding volume, and we can do that even at the unit level. And by doing that, that really helps everybody start to understand the why that much more, especially if rounding volume is matching an improvement in HCAPs or a improvement in those outcome scores. We can line those two up and then everybody gets on board.
Great.
So I think now that we talked about the why, now let's focus on the who. So who needs to be involved with, getting the rounding set up. So Steve, what has been your experience when you do not have an executive sponsor?
So we're going to give two examples. I'll give one and Kristen will give another one, but it really is about executive buy-in and how incredibly important that is. And we'll talk about not only executive buy-in, but what happens when you don't have it. In this case, I did work with an organization that didn't have executive buy-in. What they did have is they hired a few people that were specifically sent out to do rounds. However, those people didn't really know the why. They didn't have anybody within leadership kind of announcing why they're out there rounding. These two kind of mid-level rounders had to go out into the organization and introduce why they were even there. They had to say, I'm rounding. This is why I'm rounding. This is what we're hoping to learn from the rounds. And it really wound up for the rounders creating a lot of nervousness. They didn't feel well supported. And in fact, one of the three actually left the position 6 months in because they didn't feel supported. And they didn't always feel comfortable walking into a unit because no one had given them kind of that wind in their sails, if you would. Kristen, I think you've got a good example of the exact opposite. What does it look like when you've got great leadership buy-in?
Absolutely. So when you have a true champion, it can make a world of difference. I was chatting with a CEO in Florida who had taken over a new hospital. He didn't really understand why his team was struggling with rounding, and he just wanted to get a better feel for the organization. So he started to round on employees. He'd pick someone out in the hallway and ask them some questions. At first, everyone was talking about, like, what the heck is this guy doing? Asking these questions. What is the point of this? And he actually heard an issue that he wanted to actually take action on. So the issue was something fairly simple. There was a pathway to the parking lot that was not well lit, and a lot of the female employees especially felt unsafe walking to their cars at night. So he jotted this down, he took action on it, and he made a change. The cultural shift amongst the organization that happened after he made that fairly simple change was truly amazing. He said that he started to have people come up and thank him, and he would have staff members come up and see him with his iPad and come up to him and be like, oh, are you out rounding? Can I chat with you today? And they actually felt that they were being listened to. People were taking action on it. And he said not only did it improve his understanding of the organization and how things were going there, but everyone else was then grabbing an iPad, getting out there and rounding, and it made a true difference across the organization.
Wow. No, Kristen, I've got 2 teenage kids, and this next piece of information is probably going to change my parenting style. You talk about expected, required, and mandatory. I think when I left the house this morning, I told my 14-year-old son I expect him to get out there and mow the lawn, but you're telling me maybe that wasn't the best approach.
No, so we've actually seen that saying expected is not going to give you the results that you want. So another hospital system started without buy-in, probably where a lot of you are, and had low adoption rates for rounding. They were told that they were expected to round, and there was probably about 30% adoption rate. They started to share the weekly data for all the hospitals in the system with the CEOs, and like magic, they all started paying attention. So once the CEOs started paying attention, they also started communicating that rounding was mandatory. This took their rounding efforts to a completely new level across the organization because they were expected to meet their rounding goals based on the CEO's communication of it being mandatory. They were not only meeting their rounding goals, they started identifying and fixing issues, and they started to see increases in their scores. So it really circled everything back that once the CEO made rounding mandatory, it really led to their success across the organization.
Right. Now, I also know that a lot of times we bump into organizations where this project has landed a lot of times with the patient experience group or another group, but it's not the leadership group, which means maybe you don't have an executive sponsor. So Cassie, why don't you tell us a little bit about what we do if we don't have an executive sponsor and how do we try to bring one along for the ride?
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. And, we definitely see this more so than not, probably that, maybe they've heard of rounding, they know what it is, but they're not focused on the project because they have so many other things that they are working on. So it is important, as you know, to get them engaged so that message can come from them. And a couple of things that we've seen some of the organizations we work with do is to have someone just type a message up from the CEO or a message up to give to the CEO that they can send out. Maybe you are implementing my rounding and saying that it's going to be mandatory. You could type that message up, send it to the CEO, and have them just press the send button. So you're doing 95% of the work, but just need them, their approval to send it out. Another thing is sometimes the leaders just don't feel comfortable going out and rounding because they're not used to being in the patient's room, interacting with families. So it could be a great opportunity to do some partner rounds to bring them out with you. So maybe your CNO is great, she's rounding on the floor all the time. Maybe there's an opportunity for the CEO to come shadow her, and at that point, that CEO's in the room, they get comfortable with it, they understand the process, then they can go out in the future and do their own rounds. So, really just lead them, do whatever you can, give them the tools, the equipment, provide training, coaching, and then get them involved. And soon I think that they will be engaged and excited about the process when they see everything and all the information that they're getting back.
So we've got that executive who's going to have power, who's going to have influence. And if you haven't guessed, we think this is really, really important. Mm-hmm. So whether they are already in the camp where they're going to come out leading or they need to be brought along for the ride, either way, we've got them. And so the picture, I'm going to go back to my boat metaphor. I'm kind of picturing now Washington crossing the Delaware. If you remember that classic painting, we're in the boat. No one's rowing yet. Washington is standing up there in the bow, looking at the far shore, but there's no people in this boat. So I think the next piece is going to be building that right project team. And with the right project team, you've got to have the elements of the right team. These are the people who can row. And the way they row is they row because they're engaged, they're tied to outcomes. Hopefully they're good leaders, so they have good communication and they're good listeners. They have a track record of success. They're enthusiastic. These types of traits are the types of people who can really bring more people into our boat.
Yeah, and what you can notice here is that these are just traits. We don't have titles on this screen because it doesn't matter what their title is. It just matters that they bring these traits. They're excited about rounding. They're really going out there being the cheerleader for our organization, the culture change, and that's what's important. And those are the elements that we are looking for when we're building the right project team.
And Kristen, I think we both agree that it's just as important to perhaps leave a few people back on the dock. Maybe we'll send a boat back for them, a second boat, but for this first voyage, why might we leave some people off of our boat?
Yeah, if they can't row, we probably don't want them on our boat.
Right.
So,
or if they just wag their oar in the air.
So I'm sure you guys all have a team member that you could imagine wearing this shirt that's up on the slides. So here's a few key red flags that I personally have seen. If you're a challenger, that means we present this idea, we're going to launch rounding, and all they do is challenge this idea. They come up with negative aspects. It takes too much time. I don't know how to do that. That's not really someone you're going to want to have on your champion team. Someone who's all talk with no action. This goes back to a couple of things that we've talked about. While you can tell people to round all day until you're blue in the face, if you're not out there actually rounding and showing them, leading by example, you're not going to get that same buy-in, and you've got to get your team members out there rounding. Another one is if you have some team members who have lots of opinions on rounding, but maybe aren't very knowledgeable about it, you probably want to educate them, train them, coach them on it, so they're not out there spitting the wrong message. And finally, and this I see a lot, the no authority, but they want to make it work. So I know a lot of people, and I'm sure there might be a few of you on the phone, that might be authority, but you really want this to be successful. One project leader that I worked with had no authority or a team to assist her, and she actually gained buy-in by sharing the rounding data every week via email to all the managers. She pointed out units that were doing well and achieved the goal and those that were still behind, and encouraged other managers to assist those units who hadn't quite met their goal. And by showing all the managers that this is being tracked, she was holding people accountable, and everyone really started to pitch in, and it was a team effort.
So using a little bit of data to get some people involved, using some enthusiastic team members. Man, it's nice to have at least a couple people who have influence. And I think one of the first questions that we had was, how do I get staff, how do I get people engaged with rounding? Go adopt those people that you know have influence. They usually have influence because they're enthusiastic about these types of projects. Find out what's in it for them, find out what types of data they could use, and provide that data to them. And then once you've got them on your team, they can go out and help you kind of carry this water. So we've got good people on the boat. We've left a few people behind on the shore. And now I think we have a poll question.
We do. So we really want to know, who are you missing on your team? Is it that person with power or influence? Are you missing that day-to-day champion or executive sponsor? Do you need some backup, or is it just you? Kristen, I think that there's a lot of instances where it is just one person that's really driving it. They're struggling to get some adoption and get some help. Can you talk through a few different strategies for that?
Yeah, so this goes back to, I feel like I might be a little bit of a broken record with the accountability piece and using the data, but it really makes a big difference if it's just you. You don't have the authority, you don't have a team. You really need to use the data to share with people. It's amazing once individual team members know that they're being held accountable. If you're tracking this, if you're sharing this at Daily Huddle, if you're putting this on the boards and going over it with your team on a weekly basis, if you're sending out email blasts to all the leaders, it makes a big difference to have everybody aware that there's going to be all-stars, and there's going to be those folks that are on the other end of the spectrum, and you're kind of highlighting those. And that's really how you get that buy-in from the whole team.
And of course, we're encouraging you to have data and take data out to the teams, but of course you need to do rounding before you can have data. So that is why it's nice to recruit that perhaps one unit leader that you know has enthusiasm, has some influence, and will do this for you for a few weeks just to prove it for you. So especially if you're in that patient experience role, go out and recruit somebody that can help you collect data. Even if it's on one unit, you can start using that data to show everybody how neat this is.
Great, thank you all. I'm going to close the poll here. And it looks like 20% of you are missing that person with power. That's huge. We've already talked about that. 36% are missing the day-to-day champion. And then 28% the backup leader. There's only 12% with everyone. It's just me, which is actually pretty good.
Yeah.
And Kristen, even that backup leader, what is a backup leader?
So a backup leader is somebody who can assist you. When you're a one-man, one-woman show, you know, it's kind of rough when you go out on vacation. Who's going to pick up the slack? Who's going to carry the baton? You need someone who can assist you with either training users on how to round. Maybe it's the coaching aspect, making them comfortable. Maybe it's making them comfortable with using the technology. Maybe it's sharing reports and sending out those emails. Somebody who can assist you is so helpful to keep the train, or the boat, I should say, keep the boat moving.
And I also see, 36% is that day-to-day champion. So just having somebody out there that's banging the drum. Now that can be the executive sponsor, right? It's so nice to have an executive leader who's either sending out emails, even if you have to write the emails for that person, include some of the data points and say, hey, could you please forward this to the organization? That could help drive some of that and make them the day-to-day champion. Or you go find that person with influence, you find out what they need from a data standpoint, and provide them that data so they can look like heroes. At the end of the day, you want the project to work, make them look like the superstars.
Great information.
So with that, it's time to craft some right rounds. And Cassie, maybe you can lead us into that.
Yeah, so just real quick here, just as a reminder, I'm sure some of you were in on the webinar last month, but we have a lot of great features at My Rounding, ebooks, tools, and also your account manager would be happy to work with you to really focus on, what your goal is with these rounds. Keep them short, keep them concise, use them as more of an outline for that conversation when you're talking to the patient or the staff to make sure that they're getting the consistent message, we're getting the data we need to create improvement. So like I said, just reach out to your account manager if you need help setting up and creating these effective templates.
So after you've got those created, Kristen, it's time to roll this out to the organization. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that planning?
So before you set up training, I have to say teaching the technology can sometimes be fairly easy, and that's not really what we want to focus on. We want to focus on making sure people know why they're attending this training. Why are we doing this? It goes back to our very first point. We want users who understand the why, the what's in it for me, and so they're excited to learn the tactical piece, how to round, how to do it, but they understand why it's important. And it will be a huge difference between them approaching this training of understanding why it's important and being excited to learn it versus I've had a few experiences where I have users jump on a call to learn about what this new rounding technology is, and they interrupt me and say, I don't know why I'm here. And that to me signals that this has not been communicated to the staff. Nobody understands the why. They were just told to attend this training. And I can already tell you it is not going to go well for that individual user or perhaps the entire organization.
And what we've learned from a frontline standpoint, and this comes down to really kind of amplifying the voice of the frontline. If you're using a technology like My Rounding, you have the ability to capture things on a day-to-day basis that before might have been anecdotal, but in this case starts to wrap some data around it. We had one organization where patients very commonly complained about water rushing through the wall behind the headboard. That was anecdotal for months. However, on a daily basis through rounding, they started to record the fact that every single patient was complaining. They had a data set they were able to take to facilities. Facilities was able to insulate that wall, and they no longer had complaints about it. So wrapping data around it really helped. Another thing for the frontline, so the frontline will hopefully feel like they have a better voice. They will also start asking about recognition. So when patients are recognizing staff or staff are recognizing staff, that can become a huge motivator. We had another customer who has a weekly check-in for recognition. They put it up on a wall, and there was so much great recognition that people were literally racing to grab the iPads so they could go out and recognize their peers on a daily basis. Cassie, you tell us that having some recurring meetings is also pretty important.
Yeah, absolutely. So once we, had that initial buy-in from the group and everyone's all excited, we don't want that excitement to die. So, it's very important that we continue to bring up, what's happening with our rounds throughout the recognition in monthly meetings, providing that ongoing support and coaching, whether it's, a monthly session to walk through, different scenarios you may run into, or rounding with technology, training new staff, also to train the trainers. So making sure that you have people within your organization that are confident using the tools that they can go out and train new staff and then continue that momentum. And then lastly, which we think is the most important, is just those validation rounds to make sure that rounding is taking place by going out and checking executive rounds as well as just looking at the data in the tool.
And while all these tactical pieces are important, it's also critical to make this fun. So taking it back to what Steve talked about in the beginning about making the psychological shift of for a culture change, we encourage you to make this competitive and fun. It's amazing, like Steve said, when you start showing data, people will start wanting to be involved to be the top performer or the top recognizer. So a couple of examples that I have, one unit picked a song that they could play when they met their goals. Their particular choice was Celebration by Kool and the Gang.
Celebration time, come on.
Another one was a hospital highlighted top rounders by inviting them to a breakfast with senior leadership once a month. So that was a nice opportunity for them. Some managers share recognitions during their daily huddle to give additional praise and spark competition. Everyone wants to be recognized. And then one other organization bought a stuffed fish. Why it's a stuffed fish, I don't know.
Hey, we're on a boat. I'm glad that we have a fish story.
And they gave the stuffed fish to the unit with the best rounding performance that week or month, and the units took their picture with this fish. It became a huge point of pride to have their fish in their unit, take a photo with it. They started posting them. Again, whatever works for your organization, the idea is, I've heard lots of great ideas that work, and it's important to pick something to get that buy-in.
All right, well, I can see the far shore. Land ho. Cassie, can you wrap this up? Maybe throw the bow line to the guy on the dock?
Absolutely. We'll take him home. So, yeah, I think that was a lot of great information. And, like we said, I think the most important thing is really going to be to establish that why. And to remember that not everyone is going to have the same why. CFO, maybe it's the ROI, so maybe a frontline staff is just, taking the best care of the patient that they can. So figuring out what that why is for each person on your team, figuring out who the who is going to be. So sometimes, you get that executive buy-in right away. Others, you may need to lead them down the path. Then the difference between a project team and the right project team, whereas a project team can, get together, it may take them a year or so to figure them out. But if you get together those characteristics of that right project team, they can execute on that quickly. Then we need to craft the right rounds by using those short, concise, effective templates where you can work with My Rounding and utilize our tools. And then finally, roll it out, make it fun, keep it exciting, and also just get everybody on the team engaged and in the same place.
Great. Thank you, Kathy, Kristen, and Steve for doing that great presentation. There was a lot of great information in there. And thank you all for joining us on the phone today as well. If you do have questions, please go ahead and put those in the questions box on the right-hand side. While you're typing, I'm going to go over just a couple of housekeeping things. If you have additional questions after this, please feel free to email us at info@myrounding.com. That actually goes to the majority of the team, so we'll make sure that it gets answered quickly and efficiently. If you want to watch this recording again later, or you want to share it, it will be available on our website. It will be on myrounding.com/blog as a new post later today. We'll also send you the specific link tomorrow as well. Also, a reminder that we do have that upcoming healthcare-associated infections webinar and ebook coming out in the next couple weeks. So the ebook will be out next week, and then the webinar will be a few weeks later. So keep an eye out for that, as well as our upcoming ebooks as well. And then also, really just when you close this out, take a couple minutes and fill out that really short survey that pops up. It's just a couple of questions. They're really simple, and that just helps us gather some feedback and some information about what you're looking for, if you found this helpful, and really what will make this more beneficial for you in the future. So let's go over to the questions. One of the questions that came in said, sometimes I feel I'm bothering the patients. They see so many people throughout their stay, and they feel that they're tired with so many visitors. So how do you fit rounding into that?
So one way that I've heard this before, this is not new, is to make sure that when you're out there asking questions, you're not bombarding them with 20 questions on a template that you think is hitting every single point you could possibly want to ask them. Make it short, make it sweet, and make sure that your intro is explaining to them that you're here to make sure that their stay is going well. So some of my top performers have 3 questions, and that's it. And they're open-ended, and it's just letting the patient explain what's going on, but it's not a long list. It's not like an interview or a checklist, and it helps them feel like you're having a conversation and wanting to know what's going on with them, rather than, hey, I got to check off these questions real quick. So make sure you focus your efforts to be more personal with the patient and make it short and sweet.
And Kristen, you recently, I think, told me a story about a customer who is using one of my favorite questions, which is, what is your primary concern today? Yeah. And just by asking what was the patient's concern today, they were able to draw out something that was pretty important.
Yeah, so I was hoping I could remember the story that Steve was referring to.
I was trying to give you as much time as possible to remember.
And basically, the nursing staff thought they had done everything right for this patient, and they thought, meds were given, they're not in pain, everything's going well, documentation is filled out. And when they asked what your biggest concern was, they realized that the patient felt that their room wasn't clean. The trash can wasn't emptied, the bathroom hadn't been cleaned, and they were very upset about that. They wanted a clean room. That was their biggest concern. And so when they answered that, it totally gave them pause and said, oh, wow, we've been looking at this the wrong way. We will get right on that. We'll send this up to EBS. We'll get housekeeping out here. And they were able to fix it. But had they stuck with nursing communication or staff responsiveness questions, they never would have heard that the patient was actually upset about the room not being clean.
Yeah, that's why we like this question, what's your primary concern? I also have a friend in his 60s who was in for hip replacement, and they on a daily basis asked him about pain, and it turns out he wasn't really in much pain. They never asked a question about clean, and they never asked what his primary concern was. Therefore, they never caught on the fact that actually clean and quiet was probably the thing that was most important to him as a 60-year-old man. It also depends on the demographic. Depending on who you are, you have different needs and different concerns. So it's important to really tease out specifically to that patient what is their primary concern.
Yeah, and it may not be a concern that's even directly tied to their care that they're receiving. Their concern could be that they're worried about their dog at home, that they're getting taken care of, or things like that. So, bringing that out really just allows you to, get to know that person and really build that connection. And, again, if it's something with their dog, maybe you can make sure that they have someone that can watch him or whatever it may be. But it allows you to really figure out what their concern is by asking those open-ended questions.
Great. Our next question is one that we touched on, I think, the month before last, but it's a great question, so thank you for bringing it up. It's, do you think that we should sit when we go into a room, when you round on patients, to try to make a better connection, or should we just stand?
No, sitting, of course, all the time, every time. I've seen staff go out, and if there was not a chair available, go out and drag a chair into the room, take that extra time. If you ever saw Men in Black with Will Smith, where he grabs the table and drags it across the room and it makes all the screeching noises, do that so you can make that eye contact with the patient.
I think we've also seen data where if you are standing over the patient asking them questions, they feel like you were in the room for 30 seconds. And if you sit down, you could take the exact same amount of time, but if you sit down, they feel like you were in the room 3 to 5 times longer, and they feel like you were really personally connecting and asking those questions.
It also makes them way more comfortable to not have to strain their neck to be looking up and just being on their same level. So there's tons of different reasons about why, but we really stand behind the commit to sit mentality. Great. All right. Another question that came in was, we talked about people with power and people with influence. Are both successful? Do you need both?
You do. The difference between power and influence, honestly, usually influence works even a little bit better than power. And you probably know who those people are in your organization. They might not even have a high up title, but man, if they have influence, if they're well respected in the organization, go get that person in the boat first, because they're probably going to help move it faster than any executive ever could. But then, of course, power, if people know that they're being checked up on, or if people know that somebody in power, that this is important to them or they're watching, then it's very likely that they'll get on board as well. So influence first, probably, then power.
Great. All right, we talked about the right people on the boat. What if the right person on the team isn't great to work with?
Interesting. What if the right person on the team isn't great to work with?
I think that brings up just opportunities to work with them and coach, and maybe if they're having struggles with something, you can sit down with them, have a one-on-one meeting with them, and figure out what else is going on. Maybe you don't know what their why is. Maybe you thought you knew their why and you talk with them. I think just getting to know the person, understanding them, and then if they are not great to work with in the end, then maybe it's just time to kind of funnel them out and bring someone else in that is engaged, that is really excited about the project, that everyone likes working with. So I think it is important to figure out and talk to that person, and then discuss and figure out what the next steps would be after that.
Cassie, I like your positive outlook on this, because I don't know if it would have been my go-to, but I am thinking about, I do have an example in my mind right now of someone who I never would have guessed would have been a great project leader. However, this person, after having worked with them now for about a year, is incredibly engaged, although I never would have, right out of the gate, I never would have picked them as a project leader, but they really, really have kind of driven the momentum of this project, and I was pretty impressed. So sometimes you need to give somebody a month or two and see how they do, but I guess before you make your decision.
I guess the other thing I was thinking of while they were talking, I agree, Cassie's was very positive, was when you say they're the right person, I'm wondering what those reasons are, because if you remember back to our slide about building the right team, we really didn't have titles, and so I'm wondering if sometimes people are fallen told you're going to be doing this, so you are the right, and I'm using air quotes, person on the team, when really if you're not good to work with, I would question how you would be influential and be able to get the rest of the team on board, as well as be a good coach and trainer. So I'd just be a little cautious when you say that they're the right person. If they're told to be on there, that doesn't necessarily make them the right person to be on the team.
I think our advice is either give them a shot or leave them behind. It's up to you.
Sure. So I think we have about time for about one more question here. So do you think it's best to round in teams of 2 or more, or is it just a single person? And going along with that, do people feel intimidated with more than one person?
So I'm a big advocate for partner rounding when you first start out. It is a great way for you and your partner to both learn from each other. You may see your partner doing something that you love, and you may see something that you don't necessarily agree with, and you can coach each other to become the best rounders that you can be. The other thing is that it gives you an opportunity to become more comfortable. Maybe you start practicing with your partner and then you go out and talk to the patients, but it's a really great way to kind of have a little bit more fun with it too, so you're not doing it alone at first. I've heard from numerous hospital systems that they really like starting with partner rounding and then eventually going off and doing it individually.
Yeah, and I think the worry about bringing multiple people into the patient's room to do the round, you know, as long as you're explaining, saying, hey, we're doing this round, we got this great new rounding tool, you know, kind of building that up. I'm bringing, you know, my colleague, you know, Kristen with me because I want to make sure that, you know, she's fully trained and she's able to, you know, come out and do these rounds in the future to all of her patients, so they're getting the same great care. So I think as long as you explain it on the front end, it's not going to be any different to that individual if 1 or 3 people are in the room with them.
Especially if you're all sitting.
Yep.
With that intimidation factor. All right, great. Well, thank you all for joining us today, and thank you all for being on our panel. We will follow up with some links here, and otherwise we hope to see you on our next webinar next month. Have a great day.